In this video, I'd like to introduce the concept of a data model in Excel. In previous videos that I've created, I've done things like created a pivot table, and the pivot table was created from a rectangular grouping of data that was all on one sheet. However, in the real world, that's not typically how things work. Either it's an Excel spreadsheet in which the data is spread across many sheets, or it's data that's coming from databases in which the data is in lots of different tables. And I'll kind of demonstrate that with this image right here. It's a little bit blurry, but here we see a table of employees and orders and customers and shippers and order details and products and suppliers. And so if we were to just look at one of these, like orders, and consider these rows here to be column names, it would have an order ID and a customer ID and an employee ID. And so if this were turned into a worksheet, this particular representation of a database table, then it would be nice if you had the customer name and the employee name and things of that nature. However, that's just not how things are organized. And so in the real world, and so when you're given data that's been pulled out of a database, if it were all of this order related data, you would get a worksheet of customers and a worksheet of orders and a worksheet of employees, and so that complicates the process of creating something like a pivot table that pulls all those things together. Now, at a high level, what we need to do in order to be able to create a pivot table from different worksheets of data is add each worksheet into something that's behind the scenes called the data model. And so let me demonstrate the process for that. So first, let's look at the problem that we're dealing with here. We have right here a list of sales that have been performed by somebody, and the way that the representatives are represented here is by a state name. And so if I were to look up 103, it might be something like Texas or West Virginia. And so it would be nice if I could summarize things like sales by Texas or West Virginia or Utah, but this isn't suitable yet for turning it into a pivot table. We have to first turn these two sets of data into tables that will be related to one another by this ID column, and then we'll be able to do the operations. So let me proceed forward through the steps. So the first thing I want to do is highlight this area, do Control T to create a table, and this is the sales table. So on the Design tab, I will name this particular table Sales, and then I will go over to the Reps worksheet, highlight the data, and I will call this table Reps. Alright, now I need to add this to the data model, and I have two different ways that I can do this. There may be more, but I just know of two off the top of my head. One way to do this would be to start the process would be to say Insert Pivot Table, and then click this little box that says Add to the data model. And if I did that, then just one of the two tables would be added to the data model behind the scenes, and it would be just this one, the sales one. I'm going to forego doing it that way so that I can just demonstrate how to do both tables kind of the manual way. If I go to Data, Connections, and then now this is only possible after I've created tables. And if I go over here to add to the data model, and I have to go to this tab here that says Tables, and both of these are white, meaning that neither of them are in the data model yet. So I'll add that. And after it gets added, it adds this little thing here that says data model, and then underneath it is a description that ends with, it's pointing at a particular worksheet. and we see this exclamation point sales, so we know that we're looking at the sales table within that particular worksheet. Now, the next thing we'll do, actually it's not a worksheet, it actually is referencing the entire name of the file, but let's just do that again. Add to the data model, and this time we're going to select the other one. Now notice one of them is gray now and the other one's white. That's one that's not been included yet, and I click OK. Alright, so now I see within the data model that there are two tables behind the scenes. So we're now almost ready to create a pivot table. There's one last thing that we have to do, and that's we go to this little icon here that says relationship. So I click on that, and there's nothing there currently, so I'm going to click new, and what I'm trying to do is relate the two tables together somehow. And so I'm going to select the name of the tables that I want to be connected, and the thing that associates them together is this ID column. So I was able to figure that out. I click OK. So it was ID and ID. Now keep in mind that you might have, in this case I just have two tables, but in other cases you might have more of a hub and spoke situation, as if it were a wheel. So let me bring this back up again for a moment. In this case, the orders table is the one that you need to create things to. So if I were to create lots of relationships among the tables, in each case, if I was connecting orders and customers, I would say connect from the orders table customer ID to the customers table customer ID. And then to connect to the employees table, I would again include orders. I'd say connect from the orders table and the employee ID to the employees table employee ID. So the employee ID is the thing that comes in the second column. What I wouldn't be doing is I wouldn't be connecting like employees table to customers, because they have nothing in common. So it's very typical, particularly in the case of e-commerce or whatever, that or any purchasing sales type transaction environment, that you'll have some table like orders that has the majority of the IDs in it, and then so for every relationship that you create in this fashion, you're going to have the kind of the central table be included each time. And if you need to change it because you make a mistake, you can either delete it or edit it and go back to fix that. Okay, having completed that portion, I am now ready to create a pivot table. So I'll go Insert, Pivot Table with my table highlighted, and I'll click OK. And at first glance, I'm not, now this is actually performing a little bit differently. In this particular, I've noted that in different computers things come up a little bit differently. Usually it will come up with a couple little things here, like I should have seen something like active versus all as two options here. In this case I see more tables, so I'll just click on that. And it says, do you want to create a new pivot table? Sure. Okay, now this is the way that it's supposed to work. And so because of that, I now have both tables listed there, and my numeric field is sales, so I'll drop that down, and my my list of sales reps per per transaction is listed here, the unique ones with the name state. So if I drop that down to rows, even though for then Alaska there may be many different sales for them, actually I can figure that out as well. Watch this. I'll drop that down here, and it does count. So I'll see now that there are 7 sales within Alaska, and that the sum of those is this value right here. And so kind of the magic here is that I had 2 entirely different tables, but I can treat them as if these ID things were missing, and that this were all part of just one list of variables, and all the data is related to one another. It's as if each record is all on one row. Each instance of a sale is together on the same row with the state, and so we can do our traditional things here. And so you could potentially have lots of different tables, and as long as they're connected appropriately, oftentimes around a central type of table, then you'll be able to do all kinds of slicing and dicing, and you'll note that there's a problem if they're not connected, of course, because it just won't work and you won't get the results that you're expecting to get. And just for kicks, we could also demonstrate that we can sort these things. So in this case, I'll just sort it in reverse order. And another thing we could do is with our pivot table, we could give it some formatting, whatever we think is appropriate. So again, that's just for fun. It's not something you have to do. I just wanted to demonstrate that it's a capability within the software.